Teachers of Reddit, what red flags have you seen in your students? What happened? I was a TA in an after-school tutoring program at a public school back in the late 90s. I noticed one girl, Stacy, right away, 7-year-old, who was only allowed to use the restroom with supervision, and the restroom had to be empty of all other kids. On my first day I was helping her and she was scooting around in her seat a lot, and she said, "My private part itches." I thought it was very odd, so I asked about her, and holy crap, I will never forget it. Stacy was born to a 13-year-old girl who was raped by her father, and the grandfather molested her as a baby as well. When she was young, her mom started bringing men home for prostitution purposes. The mom would service men with her daughter laying in bed next to her, and it was pretty much a given that Stacy was molested by those men as well. Her mom also smoked heroin with her daughter next to her. She was taken by CPS and was in foster care when I taught her. This poor kid would attempt to molest other little girls in the bathroom and scream sexually explicit phrases at any given times. She would masturbate and pee everywhere in the bathroom if not supervised. This poor girl was kicked out of every foster home for acting out sexually. Finally, they found a lady who was a social worker who dealt with juvenile gang members. She was tough as nails. Nothing scared her. She agreed to take Stacy in. Slowly we began to see the sexual aggression stopping. She stopped wetting her pants, and the yelling obscenities stopped. She still had to be supervised around other girls and in the bathroom, but she began playing appropriately. 6 months after Stacy got her new foster mom, she was reading and writing and acting almost like a kid her age. Speaking to her foster mom one day, she said that she has begun the process to adopt Stacy, and if she could get through the school year without another behavioral issue, she would be adopted. I had to leave to go to college, so I wasn't there to see it, but my old boss emailed me and said that the adoption had been finalized and they moved to another state so Stacy wouldn't keep getting flashbacks from the old places. I desperately wish I knew how she'd turned out. I'm a technology teacher, design and make. I had an 11-year-old student who was terrible at using scissors and couldn't thread a needle. She had very high grades academically, but something didn't seem quite right. I recommended she receive special assistance and a referral, and it turns out after testing that she had very little spatial awareness and almost no hand-eye coordination. After calling the parents, and we found that her mother was paralyzed and in a wheelchair, only dad had come to parent interviews etc., and dad was very busy working to support them both, so no one had ever played any physical games or activities with her. She hadn't developed in this area and was intelligent enough to hide these shortcomings in previous school activities. Not a difficult fix, lots of time doing crafts, throwing and catching balls, that kind of thing needed, but something that could have really held her back in the future. I've been a teacher for a lot of middle schools and elementary as well, teaching art. What up art majors anyway? There was one young man who changed my life on what I thought humanly possible to go through. Dean was his name, and since this was during the big Deion Sanders hype, he was picked on a lot for basically looking like the opposite of the athletic NFL star. Dean was one of the sweetest kids I met. He was a little overweight for his age, 12 years old, 230 pounds, but it seemed as the school year progressed he also seemed to look gradually thinner. It was odd, most of the time you never see those crazy transformations from fat to skinny unless you teach at high school. I remember asking him one day after about 3 months of noticing what was going on, and I decided to finally act on what I was feeling. We got talking and I finally asked him, "So Dean, how have you lost all this weight?" I tried my best not to make it awkward, but as he started telling me how he had done it, I realized it wasn't his decision. I half thought before he was going to say something along the lines of "I just can't handle the bullying," or "I hate it when they make fun of me." That was not the case. His mother had him on a diet of only celery ever since he first went home and complained about the bullying. He explained how every night his mother would weigh him, and if he didn't make the weight goal for that week, she would punish him. It was severe. Anytime he didn't make it, his mother would tie his arms to one end of the bed and each of his legs tied to each corner on the opposite side of the bed. Then, she would begin punching him 2 times in the gut and 1 kick to his genitals until he threw up. Gosh, I just remember listening to all this and I couldn't believe it. I knew his mother from PTA events, she was strict and demanding, but it all seemed out of character. Then Dean lifted his shirt, showing the dark purple bruise marks all over his stomach. She ended up going to jail not too long after Dean and I had our conversation. Dean ended up being one of my favorite students and we still talk today. He is actually a student teaching in my class as we speak. I had a teacher tell us, the entire classroom, that she doesn't send letters or notes home regarding a student's behavior because she once had a student come back the next day with bruises. I'm honestly so thankful for teachers like this. I didn't do too well on a bio test once, and my teacher wanted me to get it signed. Once she saw my hesitation, she withdrew immediately, asked if I would be in danger if I had it signed, and then never sent anything home again. Bless her. My mom had a kid who came from a very broken home. I can't remember specifics, but he was raised by his grandmother due to his mother and father being incarcerated. He's given my mother some hell by being violent towards other students, violent towards her and other teachers, and even showing violence towards administrators. During centers, the kids are divided up, and my mom has a group with her including this child. They read a story about a dog, and my mom used that to segue into some comprehension questions concerning the story. The topic of pets is brought up, and the boy mentions that his sister's rabbit died earlier in the year and that he was the one who killed the rabbit. My mother gets a bit concerned and asks the boy if it was on accident, and he replies that it wasn't and that he choked the rabbit until it stopped breathing. My mom quickly had to push the topic to something else because the other kids in the center's group were noticeably uncomfortable, including herself. My mother began the process to put him into an alternative school for students with emotional behavioral difficulties, but his mother got out of jail and moved him along with his siblings to Florida just before he was set to begin that school. Florida, why is it always Florida? My theory is that places like southern Florida and southern California are renowned for their warm weather, palm trees, beaches, fun outdoor activities, etc., so they embody dreams of freedom, happiness and success for many Americans. A lot of very troubled people seem to feel that they will escape their difficulties by moving to places like this, not realizing that their problems are still within them. My mom worked at my elementary during and after my stay there. She worked as a teacher's aide and would help out during lunch. While I was in middle school, she told me about a little girl who came to lunch every day with a crummy smushed sandwich and nothing else to eat. Her brother, on the other hand, would get a more acceptable lunch. She said that the first few times they noticed it, they would offer milk and fruit to her, but the brother would just take it away from her, so they had to start waiting for him to finish his own lunch and go outside for recess before they could feed her. I don't know what happened with her after that though, but I felt so much anger at that snot-nosed brat. What the fuck was wrong with that family that even the brother was putting down that little girl? Edit. Wow, seriously. I was young when my mom told me this story, so I don't remember all the details, but for those of you saying why they didn't stop the brother would tell the mother that they were helping the girl and she would just get even more worse off from it. That girl was in the worst position to be in. Basically, he would take the food and tell mommy the adults were giving sister food, and she would come in the next day with absolutely nothing, not even the crummy smushed sandwich. As well, I don't know how the story ended, and really I don't think I even want to know. I just like to think that my mom and the other teachers were able to do something nice to a sweet little girl in her shit life, and that they got her to know that someone does care. I work in an inner-city school in an under-resourced neighborhood. There are so many red flags every week, I couldn't count them all. One little boy stands out to me though. I greet the kids as they come into school every morning, and one day I noticed a man and a child walking across the lawn to our door slowly, the man getting in the child's face a few times. Finally they reach the door, and the man practically hands his son to me, saying, "Can you make sure he gets to his classroom? He just tried running away from me a minute ago." I was speechless, but I took the kid, who was quietly tearful, and brought him into the building. I was trying to ask him whose class he was in so I could take him to his room, but he wouldn't talk to me. Finally he said, "I don't want to go home ever again," just as I was getting him through the door, and another teacher stepped in and swept him away, telling him, "We haven't seen you in weeks. Don't cry, we don't do that here." I know she meant well, but I could tell that it had taken a lot for that kid to say what he did, and I didn't know if he would share that with anyone else. I told the school social worker and can only hope that he's being taken care of now. That boy broke my heart. Edit. A lot of people are telling me to call CPS. It's worth considering, but truthfully I don't think I'm qualified to be making those decisions. I'm not a full teacher, I'm an AmeriCorps volunteer, and I was trained to report to the social worker. I'll be following up with the social worker though. I had a kid my first or second year, so this was 1995-96, who was pretty scary. I teach English, BTW. He was just an asshole, had an excuse for everything, tried to bully other kids. When we had discussions about literature, he wanted to derail the conversation into weird territory hard to explain, but the kid was just off. At parent conference time, mom came in, and I was careful to say some positive things. Him derailing conversations because creativity, for example. Mom cried and told me no one had ever said anything positive about her kid before me. She even wrote me a thank you note. I also covered the aspects of his behavior that concerned me, of course. Anyway, after high school he got arrested for theft, drugs, and assault and spent some time in jail. He committed suicide before he was 30. Edit. I didn't mean for the ending to be so abrupt. I had him in 10th grade, totally forgot about him, and then a few years later I heard he was in jail, and then a few years after that heard he had committed suicide. He's not the only disturbed kid I've had, but because it was my first year, I remember him. We had a severely autistic child at our preschool, and he was eventually forced to leave as he needed teachers with more extensive training and smaller class sizes. We all loved him, but the school just was not right for him. I could tell as he was getting older but not progressing developmentally at all that his parents were a wreck. They were devastated. Every time they had to come get him because he'd lost his temper and thrown a chair at a friend, I could see his dad had been crying. So from then on, I made it my mission to pay super close attention to Paul, and damn it, I would find one great thing he did that day. Even if it was handing me back my pen. All of his autism issues were legally required to be documented in writing, so I decided our verbal in-person communication would only be positive. Paul shared his crayons today. Paul got to hold the pointer today. On his last day before he left, his father thanked me for doing as much as I could to make Paul's transition less negative all the time. It allowed him to have days where he really felt like a normal 3-year-old who just had a fun day at school. It meant the world to me. I fucking loved that kid. Update edit. Thanks, everyone. I wanted to make sure they didn't need to stress anymore on normal pickup days. If it's 4 p.m. and you haven't heard from us, it will continue to be good news. Side story. We had another kid with a lot of behavioral issues. He was just really physical with other kids and always hitting, kicking, biting, except when he played with the equally unpredictable and violent Paul. But you put the two of them together and they played calmly, spoke to each other, shared, used manners, they were like normal boys. But only with each other. A bit different from some of the others, but I once taught a class of 30 at-risk 4th graders. They were getting supplementary math lessons as they were failing their regular math class, and it was rough. It was one of those schools where they have metal detectors at every entrance. On multiple occasions I broke up rather impressive fights. Without conventional weapons, they were really ingenious. One kid once ripped out the 3-ring part of the 3-ring binders and attacked another student's forearm with it. Really creative, but obviously not great behavior. I was an untrained and unqualified teacher. I was supposed to be designing after-school program curriculum, not teaching. I actually completely missed the red flag. One kid, I'll call him Darren, was really well behaved. I never had to say anything to get him to sit down, stop hitting other students, stop throwing things, or any of a number of disruptive activities going on in the classroom. In fact, he never did much at all. He spent most of the time dozing off or barely listening, leaning forward and resting his head in his hands. I didn't think anything of it, as the rest of the class was so much for disruptive and destructive. I was spending most of my time and energy just keeping them under control. Well, Darren was quiet and sleepy during class because his house burned down at the start of the school year. The fire killed his grandma, who raised him, and his dog. He was sent to live with his cousins, 12 people who lived in a very small house with nowhere close to enough bedrooms to be legally occupied the way it was. Darren had been depressed and having problems sleeping, sharing a room with his cousins for the entire year by the time I found out what happened. I learned on the last day of school. I'm sorry I didn't know, Darren. I'm sorry I didn't notice you were having problems.